We Are the Weather by Jonathan Safran Foer. The author of this book discusses a global dilemma many of us face in today's age. Something allegedly fascinating about We Are the Weather is the way the author does it. It's surprising, unique, and strikingly personal, but we'll see about that. There seems to be this constant focus in this book on our immediate comforts at the risk of a worsening long-term crisis of climate change getting worse. But this just makes me wonder what it is exactly that makes us stick to what we know versus what we want. But we'll see about that too. In this video, I'm going to go over the chapters, things I found surprising or interesting about this book, some standout quotes, who I recommend this book to, and what books to maybe check out next. Just so you guys know, there are affiliate links in the description. If you guys buy anything through those links, like maybe this book, then I get commission, which helps me build this channel and keep making these videos. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sam, and I want to make self-growth normal because people should not have to look this information up. It should just be mainstream knowledge. If you agree, then please make sure to smash that like button. Chapter 1, Unbelievable. He begins with a story of his realization truly hitting him that everyone in history has breathed the same air as him. And given the theme of We Are the Weather, I found this a profound yet serious way to start it. Then he explained industry changes and dematerializations and innovations that took place during and after World War II. This book is on a list of non-fiction books I found while browsing TikTok, and I made a video about other recommendations. I'll drop a link to it in the description. You guys can watch it after this one. But this is the second choice in that video that I checked out, and the colorful, literary, widespread perspectives and storytelling of these authors constantly leaves traces to me of other authors I've come across over the years, like Malcolm Gladwell and Charles Duhigg. We know that global warming has to do with pollution, ocean temperatures, and rainforests, but most of us probably find it hard to explain how our behaviors are boosting hurricane winds by almost 30 miles an hour or contributing to a polar vortex that makes Chicago colder than Antarctica. Changes in weather like forest fires, record deaths from record heat waves, annual 1,000-year floods. But that's just weather, right? It's just, daily weather. What's on the Weather Channel? Oh, it's just weather. Climate change, despite how important it is to understand, is so uninteresting to so many people. It's no wonder why it's not a subject that everybody believes in. The author speaks beautifully about the climate change crisis, quoting others as how it's a crisis of culture, of imagination, and thus of belief. It seems fundamentally impossible to pull it from over there in our contemplations to over here in our hearts. And it's very interesting what he said about the structures that cause us to continue ignoring crises that aren't right in front of our faces, and what you would have to do in order to change them. It requires structures that facilitate actions that generate feeling, and building a new structure requires architects and typically the dismantlement of the ones in the way, even if we're so used to seeing them that we don't even see them at all. Chapter 2 is how to prevent the greatest dying. What does this mean, the greatest dying? Does that mean the dying of the greatest, or the greatest series of deaths? I don't know. You learn in this chapter about methane and nitrous oxide emissions, what causes them to increase, and about deforestation and why it matters. Did you know that livestock are responsible for 32,564 million tons of carbon dioxide emission equivalent per year? That's 51% of annual emissions, more than all cars, planes, buildings, and power plants and industry combined. Assuming international cooperation, a global conversion to wind, water, and solar power is estimated to take 20 years and cost $100 trillion. Almost everyone knows what $1 trillion is. So just a quick reminder of the magnitude of this number. All the work and time and effort that it takes you to make $1,000, multiply that by 1,000, and then multiply that by 1,000, and then multiply that by 1,000. Every time you multiply it by 1,000, it is literally 1,000 times of a bigger deal than the previous. Oh, and by the way, you have to multiply everything I just said by 100, because it's 100 trillion. $1 trillion, let alone $1 billion, is the furthest thing from a joke. And why am I spending so much of this review explaining the magnitude of $1 trillion? Anyway, chapter 3 is called Only Home. He begins this chapter with another taste of what I mentioned before, that whole personal feeling to the book. He compares his childhood home now to the first 9 years of his life and how his neighborhood has changed. Please, guys, please feel free to comment below how your childhood home, neighborhood, and town have changed. But when you do it because of this book, let's try to keep in mind what it says about where the environment is going. How has your childhood home, neighborhood, and town changed since you lived there? Unless you're still there. I guess you could still say how it's changed since as far back as you remember, but just let me know in the comments below. I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say about this. This guy seriously knows how to start a chapter and how to bring it to a meaningful view that ties the whole concept together in a super universal way. In this one, he said that for most people, home is the least threatening place, and because of that, it's the place we're least likely to accurately perceive threats. Isn't that crazy? Chapter 4 is Dispute with the Soul. This one was a little weird. This chapter began, and I think ended, with the length of a conversation the author had with someone about the flaws in the reality of his viewpoint and lacking the self-control to practice what he preaches. Like how writing the book and promoting it has or hasn't been enough to make a difference. It's like a constant fear and fight that he had with himself when he was writing this. You don't want to give up on your burgers, your drive to the grocery store, flights to Europe, and cheap electricity. You don't want to be that awkward person at the dinner party or have anyone think you're rude. When I mentioned earlier that there are parts in like very personal moments in the book, this is what I was talking about. Here's some statistics on where we are now. Only 14% of Americans deny climate change, lower than I thought. A lot lower, actually, than I thought. That is less than who deny evolution or that the Earth orbits the sun. And 69% of voters, including the majority of Republicans, said that we should have remained in the Paris Climate Accord. As the author said, there's nothing more conservative than conservation. And lastly, chapter 5, More Life. This book, overall, reminded me a lot of How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. But with how he writes, though, it's like a super distinct way what kind of crisis we've increasingly faced over the years with climate change, and that is not something you're necessarily going to find in How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. This one shows an almost constant internal struggle of, am I doing the right thing? It shows how little we understand about the sacrifices we make, and a glance at the relationship between good and bad in a national and sometimes global, generational context that you just cannot ignore. Whether you deny it or not, it is in your face. Quotes. Climate is quite possibly the most boring subject the science world has ever had to present to the public. Even if they're not persuasive enough on their own to change our behavior, facts can change our minds, and that's where we need to begin. As with body temperature, a few degrees can make a difference between health and crisis. For everyone to live like an American, we would need at least 4 Earths. Admit it, it feels good to point out other people's shortcomings. Ostriches don't bury their heads in the sand. They bury their eggs for warmth and protection, and occasionally submerge their heads to turn them. Humans look at ostriches caring for their offspring and mistake it for stupidity, but we are the animals who assume the world goes dark when we close our eyes. Direction 1. I recommend this book for anyone who wants a more bleak and retrospective view on what is causing the climate crisis at the rate at which it's being caused. Direction 2. If you like this book, you might like How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. They sort of go hand in hand. I think this one is a little bit more on like the viewpoint side of things, and that one's a little bit more on the here's how we're going to have to do this side of things. We Are the Weather by Jonathan Safran Foer. There's a link in the description if you guys want to check it out and read the reviews. That and all the other books that I mentioned in this video if you want to check those out too. If there are any other books that you guys want me to check out and review, please let me know in the comments below. Also let me know if you checked out this book and you liked it. But hey, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because I don't get why people watch this far into my videos and they don't subscribe. But if you have subscribed and you want to turn it up just a notch and turn on that notification bell to get a notification whenever I drop a new video, that would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. You can find me everywhere, and I will see you then.